Jó estét kívánok, good evening. Welcome to the MCC book launch. Our guest is Katy Faust. Her book in English is Them Before Us. In Hungarian it's much more lyrical. It's Szemünk, fényei, as you can see here. It's about children and families. And Katy has it that we got it all wrong, the way we look at families and how to think about child protection, essentially. But before we begin, let me say two things. First of all, I have something called a Slido here, or a tablet with a Slido app on it. Anyone able to use the Slido and comfortable with it, please feel free to write down questions when question time comes. And those who are not comfortable with it, like me, for instance, you can just raise your hand afterwards and say, hello, I want to ask something, okay? Before we begin, we're still a little bit under the impression, Katy, of just having met the Prime Minister and the former Minister for Families, Katalin Novák, who is nominated to be the next head of state in Hungary. And she talked a lot about her vision of families and how to protect them. What was your impression?
Well, what I'm so grateful for is that it seems to me that the government of Hungary is taking a proactive approach, which is really important. I think that most Western countries have had to be reactive on all of these different issues, right? They're reacting to forces that are trying to destabilize the family or redefine the family. They're reacting to new technologies that are coming in and completely reorienting the way that we think about marriage and parenthood. And so that, to me, is the thing that stands out the most, that I'm the most grateful for, is that they are taking a proactive stance about what they are for. They are for children, they're for families, they're for marriage, they're for motherhood. And if only there were more governments like that with the courage to go against the flow, I think that we'd be in a better spot.
And they didn't even read your book yet. Just imagine what it will be once they've read it.
I left them a copy.
Okay. So, Katy, although I had a career in journalism, I read up on you in the media, found articles about you. And so I was going to ask first question. So you were raised by lesbians, and turns out media don't always get it right. Please tell us a little bit about where you come from.
Yeah, that's the best way to get good clicks, but it's not true. My parents were married until I was 10. I was very close to my mother and my father, and then they divorced, and my father dated and remarried, and then my mother repartnered with a woman. And so after their divorce, I split time between the home of my father and the home of my mother and her partner. So I always had my father in my life, thank goodness. And there is something about fathers that do something for daughters that they cannot get anywhere else. And I would say that it is a certain level of confidence. So today we were at the Prime Minister's office and surrounded by very intimidating intellectuals. Like, I know a lot of the people that were in that room and follow them on Twitter and admire them a lot. And then here you are with the Prime Minister. And a conversation came up about marriage and family. And I spoke up and said to him, don't ever back down. Don't ever allow the Western world to intimidate you into compromising on the institution of marriage. And I don't think that I would have had that level of confidence if I had not been well loved by my father. Even though he and my mom weren't together anymore, he was very purposeful about loving me and building a relationship with me. And that is something very special that fathers give their daughters. Girls with connected fathers move out in the world much more confidently than girls who have an absent father. I'm also very close to my mother, and I love her partner very, very much. I don't consider her partner to be my mother, but I consider her partner to be my friend. And they've always been a part of my life after they got together. They're part of my children's lives. And so really what I take from my childhood is saying, my mother and father mattered to me. And you can say that mothers and fathers matter, and you can advocate for marriage as a social justice issue for children because it is the only institution that unites a child's mother and father. And you can and must love the people in your life who identify as gay and lesbian, and you can do both, 100%. In fact, I would say, especially if you're a Christian, you must do both. You must advocate for marriage between a man and a woman because it protects children's rights. And you must be the most loving, sacrificial friend to those in your life who identify as gay and lesbian.
So this is already the core message of your book, essentially. But how did you get to want to write it?
Well, the core message of my book is adults need to sacrifice for children instead of expecting children to sacrifice for adults. And that runs through all of the chapters. How did I come about writing this book? I just got angry one day. I got angry because it seemed to me that all of the issues about marriage and family, especially when you're talking about the definition of marriage, obsessively focus on adults, what they want, what their desires are, their sadness, their longing, their hurts, their hopes, and ignore the child, right? It's always about what the adults want, and the children are always expected to sacrifice for them in every issue. And so I began writing about marriage as a social justice issue for children and objecting to some of the lies and the narratives that we were told during the marriage debate, like kids don't care if they have 2 moms or 2 dads. But what that really means is kids don't care if they have lost their mom or dad. And I have been working with kids for a couple decades, and I have not yet met a child who lost their mom or dad and didn't care. Very often it left a deep wound in their life. So I started writing because of the marriage issue, and then I quickly, as I researched all the other marriage and family issues, from no-fault divorce to same-sex parenting to sperm and egg donation, surrogacy, even adoption, that all of those issues were focused on the adults and what the adults wanted, instead of actually considering that children have a right when it comes to family, a right to be known and loved by the 2 people responsible for their existence. And if we can respect that right and craft our policy and our personal decisions around that right, we come up with the correct answers every time.
But if you look at the actual laws in Western countries, they all say the well-being of the child comes first. So is there a difference between the letter of the law and what we actually do?
Well, and I take that further. In the Western world, except the United States, but certainly all across Europe, every country has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the most widely ratified treaty in the world. The first article on that treaty, the primary right it identifies, is a child's right to not be killed. But the next right is the child's right to be known and loved by both parents, to not be needlessly separated from either of their parents, to be swiftly reunited if they are separated from that parent. And so they already have in their law this idea that children have a right to their mother and father. And yet, many of these same countries are now passing laws that fly in the face of those rights. Certainly what you're saying about adoption is true, that when you want to consider adoption, it's always the best interest of the child that is at the heart of it. And yet, many countries are also now debating surrogacy, which in no cases has to do with the best interest of the child, right? That is all about a marketplace centered around the desires of adults. And so unfortunately in the Western world, we are living in a bit of a split personality, right? Where in one sense we say we're talking about the best interest of the child or child well-being, and yet most of our greatest policies, and I would say some of the most dominant ideas, actually violate those child-centric principles.
Them before us, adults first. Some abortionists would say it's the best in the best interest of the child not to be born because the parents will not be any good.
Yeah. So abortion is actually the ultimate them before us issue, right? Because children have a right to their mother and father, but their right before that is their right to life. Your right to life is your primary right, my primary right, everybody's primary right. And so in the abortion debate, we actually see the them before us principle lived out the most starkly. Them, the children, have a right to life. We, the adults, need to conform to that right, even if we're unprepared for pregnancy, even if we have a scary diagnosis, even if we're feeling afraid. The child's right is more important than our fears, our longings, our desires. It is adults who must conform to that child right, rather than insisting that a child sacrifice their life so we can live as we please. We need to take that same principle into the discussion of marriage and family. Children have a right to their mother and father, and this is going to be difficult for every adult group. This claim that children have a right to their mother and father is going to insist that all adults do hard things on behalf of children. Just because adults want something or are worried about something, that does not greenlight the possibility of violating that fundamental child right. So, I'll give you a few examples. Children have a right to their mother and father. That means that adults who are in struggling marriages, right? There are certain cases where you need to separate. There are cases of abuse or severe mental illness where it's important to separate for the sake of the children very often. But in America, 70% of divorces are not because one of the adults is at fault. 70% of the divorces are because the parents fall out of love, or they have communication problems, or money problems, or dealing with childhood issues, or some kind of emotional infidelity, or porn use, right? These are very real problems, right? When I'm not doing children's rights advocacy, I'm a pastor's wife. And so I'm sitting in my husband's office doing marriage counseling, right, with adults who are facing very serious challenges in their marriage. But if you simply say, I refuse to work this through, if one adult says, I'm not going to do the hard work to fix this marriage, in essence what you're saying is, this burden is too heavy for me. Here, kid, you take it instead. Adults in struggling marriages must do the hard work to mend their marriage so that their child does not have to live in split homes with a split life. So there's a lot of adults that have a big issue with what I just said. When a couple is struggling with infertility, which is a crushing load, my friends who have infertility say it is like going through the worst breakup every month, month after month after month, and you never know if you're going to meet your true love. That's very difficult. But no amount of longing and loss for a child justifies separating a child from their own biological mother or father, who they will then grow up to long to know. For people who experience same-sex attraction, many of whom would be incredible mothers or fathers, they are not to form their family around their romantic attractions. If they are to follow their desire to have a home and a family, it must be around the child's right to be known and loved by both mother and father. It cannot be formed around their romantic inclinations. For the incredible career woman who has not met Mr. Right, who desperately wants to be a mother, who would be a wonderful mother, she cannot go out and create an intentionally fatherless child through a one-night stand or a sperm donor, because that child has a right to their father. Her desire to be a mother without being married does not override that child's right to be known and loved by their father. So I've just given you an example of all the ways that this children's rights movement is going to make just about everybody angry at some point. It's a hard message, and yet, if we are going to fix our society and mend the hearts of children, it is adults who need to do hard things and not the kids.
Fast forward into the future, we are 10 years from now, and you're actually Minister for Families in the United States. What do? You
address fatherlessness. Fatherlessness is at the root of every major social issue that we're facing in America today. So you can look at the 90% of youth who are on the street, the 70 to 85% of children who are incarcerated, the 71% of teens who commit suicide, the people who are more likely to be involved in crime, to be teen parents, to use drugs or alcohol, to have behavioral issues, and you have something in common with all of those demographics, and it's fatherlessness. Overwhelmingly, those populations are filled with fatherless children, because when you deny children their right to their father, they're emotionally starved. They do not have what they need to grow up to thrive. They don't have the emotional food that they need to become responsible people, to manage their emotions well. They don't have a father there wrestling with them, to teach them to rein in their aggression. And so it's often the police that will teach them how to do that. Fatherlessness is at the heart of every social ill that we are facing in our country, and that is what has to be addressed first. We also now have a new emerging threat of motherlessness, something that our society has never really seen before, made possible through these new and novel technologies where you can now create an intentionally motherless child. So we understand the devastating impacts of father loss. We're now about to see the impacts of mother loss as well.
One of my students approached me the other day. He wants to write a story on how to become a man without a father. In his case, the father died. But in Hungary as well, very many young people have had to grow up without a father. Why is that in the United States, for instance? Where have the fathers gone? It wasn't always like that.
Where have the fathers gone? We have told them they were unnecessary and they believed us. That's where they've gone, right? We've had these ideas that men and women are exactly the same, right? That men and women aren't truly equal unless they are the same. And unfortunately, men believed us instead of the truth that men have something critical to offer society and especially the family. That's also true for mothers, of course, but mothers don't have the same biological option to leave as men do. So first of all, the ideas have changed. Second, technology has changed, right? We have now literally made fathers optional when it comes to the reproduction process. You can simply Google sperm donor catalog and select whether you want a Middle Eastern father for your child or a Scandinavian father for your child. Do you want them to have an Ivy League degree, or can you go for a more low budget, somebody that just went to a state college? Right? So technology has changed, ideas have changed, and laws have changed, right? We said that marriage no longer needed to be permanent when we made divorce a no-fault system, saying you could leave for any and every reason. You can get out of a divorce more easily than you can get out of a cell phone contract, right? We have now redefined marriage, and we've learned that all through the world, you can look at every country that has legalized gay marriage, and you find that when husbands and wives become optional in marriage law, mothers and fathers will become optional in parenting law. Marriage and parenting go together. And so if you want fathers to be in the home, then you might want to mention that men and fathers are important in the law. But we have now come to the place where to even say that mothers and fathers matter to children, to have mothers and fathers written into our parenthood laws, in some cases constitutes discrimination. So it's now discriminatory to say that children need a mother and a father. And so we've had three forces working against dads, especially: ideas, technology, and now our legal changes.
When it comes to divorce, is it not better for children to to live with mother or father who are more or less happy than with parents who constantly quarrel? It's one of the fake wisdoms that you describe in your book. But please tell us.
Oftentimes people will say, well, what do you want? Do you want me to live in a miserable marriage, or do you want me to leave and be happy? And I'll say, no, I want you to stay in the marriage and be happy. And statistically, that's actually what happens with the majority of couples who stick it out. I've been married for 24 years. What year is it? 24 years. And every marriage goes through seasons of unhappiness. But what researchers have found out is if you are faithful and you work it through and you apply a little grit, very often that unhappy marriage becomes a happy marriage. So from the adult's perspective, sometimes one of the best things that you can do is to stay in an unhappy marriage. From the child's perspective, we know exactly what it takes for those children to be safe and happy, and it is to have their married mother and father living together. It is not to have happy divorced parents, because happy divorced parents leads to a life of instability. That is what divorce is. Divorce is the end of one home, the end of stability in a child's life, and the beginning of very often a rotation of new partners, new spouses, sometimes new half-siblings who might join the home and then leave if there is another divorce. Children have three staples in their social, emotional diet. They need other things as well, but if they don't have these three, they're emotionally malnourished. They need mother's love, they need father's love, and they need stability. Divorce takes away half of mother's love, half of father's love, and very often stability is gone completely. And so we see that divorce significantly diminishes child outcomes. Oftentimes, the non-custodial parent, the parent that doesn't live with the child full-time, disappears from the child's life altogether after about 2 years. So no, children don't need happy divorced parents. They need happy married parents. And it's the parents that decide whether or not that happens.
There's been a lot of controversy in Hungary about a child protection law that was introduced, and it's mostly about that sexual education of children, all questions of sexual identity should be left to the parents to talk about with the kids. What's your take on that law?
This law is correct, 100% correct. So what I've learned through my study, so chapter 1 of our book is all about children's rights, why they have a right to their mother and father, the importance of this right. Chapter 2 is all about biology and why biological adults, biological parents are the safest, most connected to, most invested in, and most protective of children. Now, I'm also an adoptive mom, and so you're probably thinking, wait, what about adoption? And we can talk about that if you want. But biological parents have something very specific. They give something to kids that no other adults give them. Number one, the statistical reality that they are most likely to be safe and loved when they are raised by their biological married parents. And that is the basis for my support for this law. Because the schools, a welfare program, a preschool program, and the government are never going to be as connected to, invested in, protective of children as their own parents are. And it's that reality that gives parents the authority to direct their children's upbringing. Oftentimes, these programs or the government doesn't even know your child's name. I mean, at least you should know the kids. You're the one that's been up with them in the middle of the night when they have croup, you know. You're the one that's been with them in the hospital when they've, you know, sprained their ankle. You're the ones that cheering them on the side of their soccer games. The government's not doing that. You're responsible for their medical decisions, their education, their upbringing, not the government.
I'm going to mention Germany now instead of Hungary, and I see that many young women, maybe age end 20s, early 30s, they would like to marry, they would like to have a family, would like to have kids, find it very difficult to find German men to do that with them. Much easier to find people from other countries who have moved to Germany, who have more conservative outlook on family. They come from Muslim families or whatever it is. And we have many mixed marriages because it's easier to get men from those cultures to say, yeah, of course, we marry and we have kids. That's what it's for.
Well, I think that we need a marriage revival. Obviously, your country, hopefully, is going to be able to show the rest of the world how it's done with your increased marriage rates. We just had a study that came out in the United States that said young adults in the United States are not just having less marriages, they're just having less sex, right? So we are having a relationship crisis, and so we need to have a marriage revival, not for the sake of some kind of religious right, but because this is the only way that society is going to thrive. It is not enough to just have reproduction rates. It's not enough for just women to have children. Women need to have children with the father of their children and stay together for life. This is how you create a thriving society. And so, unfortunately, Germany, it sounds like, and often a lot of places in America too, ideas have consequences. Right? And we've had bad ideas about marriage for a long time, that it's some kind of prison, right? That it's just about adult feelings. It's not. Marriage is the thing that leads to thriving very often for mother, father, and children. And it's those ideas that we need to bring back.
So why do we have this crisis? Why is it so difficult for man and woman to get together? Sometimes I feel the first feeling they have for each other, apart from the first attraction, let's say, is a suspicion. How long will it last? When will he cheat on me or she cheat on me? When will she divorce? What will happen to the car, the house, and everything?
Yes. So this is a very common problem in the United States right now. We have divorce rates are falling, but that's because marriage rates are falling further. Cohabitation rates are rising. And much of that is due to the fact that we now have the generation that lived through the spike in divorce. Right? Many of the people that are of marrying age now were surrounded by divorce. Many of them have never even seen a functional, healthy marriage. Many of them are worried that if they do get married, that their husband or wife could leave them for any and every reason because they saw their mother or father leave for any and every reason. The good news is you can break the cycle. Both my husband and I are from divorced families. And thankfully, we had great mentors in the churches that we went to show us how it's done, to tell us what it looks like. And my husband especially had a very difficult divorce. And I remember when we were dating, he came up to me when we were getting very serious. And I remember he like grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, "Are you serious about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, totally. You're hot. I'll totally do anything, whatever," right? And he goes, "No, you don't understand. If we get married, we are never getting divorced. My children will never live through what I lived through. Can you do that?" And I'm like, "Sure, no problem, whatever." Right? I didn't even know, but he knew, he remembered how painful that was. And so you don't have to recreate the faults of your parents. You don't have to become your father that abandoned you. You can become the man that you wish he was. You can create the family you deserved as children. But you do have to have people showing kids that it's even possible, right? You have to be able to reveal to them that man and woman can not just commit to one another for life, but can be great friends, who can still be deeply in love, who can still be partners in the world together. But I know that in America, there's a lot of kids that have never even seen that happen.
So in your case, religion played a role, obviously, and the church and people you met at the church played a role, and so that helped. I cannot help but notice. But many people are not religious. What's in there for them? How can they come to a better model of family?
I don't know if they can. Because even when I was growing up, at least in TV, we had some examples of healthy families in our sitcoms. But now we don't. There's very, very few even TV shows that will show quality couples loving one another, respecting one another, staying together, having the grit to get through the hard times together. And so I worry. I worry about the next generation who is growing up outside of the context where they can see a thriving marriage. There are certainly parts of our country where marriage rates are devastatingly low. In the Black community, only 17% of children will make it to their high school graduation living only with their married mother and father. So the vast majority of Black kids have to deal with the instability of split homes or not knowing their father at all. And it is a cycle that will repeat unless you can intervene. Thankfully, there's a movement of incredible Black men who are championing the remaking of the family, the revival of the mother-father married home. And so I just pray that their voices are elevated, right? That everybody will have some example in their life of what is possible. And it's hard, right? It's always putting them before us. It's always putting the children before the adults. There's always going to be struggles in that. But you need examples of good men and good women who are prioritizing their children and then reaping the benefits as a result.
Is there something, let alone government, but is there something companies can do to encourage childbearing?
I don't know if there's any companies...
Let me elaborate on that, because it may have been too cryptical. What people in the Western world often get told as how to build a career, how to build a life. It's usually, especially for women, it's first you finish school, you do your university degree, you then get your first 3-4 years work experience, and then you can marry and have children. But at that time, this is the exact moment when in the professional life, they may be promoted and they actually have to choose between career and child. Would it not be wise to have children earlier and then have employers who say, okay, you already have a child, maybe I won't lose you due to pregnancy. So is there something to be said for having children earlier?
There's a lot to be said for having children earlier. I don't trust any corporation in the United States to prioritize motherhood like that. Women need to do it themselves. Don't let a company tell you when to have children. Don't. So women, you can have it all. I feel like I have it all. I don't know who has a better life than I do. I'm so grateful and I'm so blessed. But you cannot have it all at once. You need to prioritize your children when you're young. First of all, you need to have them when you're young, because biologically you are going to get in trouble if you try to do this in your late 30s and your 40s. Now you're going to get to the point where you're going, I desperately want a baby, but your body says, honey, it's going to be too hard. And so that is a lot of the people that are seeking sperm donors and egg donors. It's people that have missed the natural window of their fertility. So women, if you're seeing pictures of celebrities having children when they're 45 or 50, it's because they are purchasing eggs from young, healthy women at colleges. And those women very often will have fertility struggles as a result of donating their eggs. So if you want a family, you need to do it in your 20s. You might be possible to do it in your 30s, but it's more challenging. Your employer may try to help by helping you freeze your eggs. That is not a way to help you have a family. That is a way to imperil your fertility and then even make it less likely that it's going to be able to occur naturally. And so this is up to you. This is something that you have to take control of. And you must then when you have children, you have to prioritize them, especially in the first 3 years. There's no babysitter, there's no daycare center that is going to be able to give your children what they need. There is something that only mothers do in the first 3 years that is so critical to child development. And I'll just tell you briefly. Babies don't have a way to control their own emotions, right? For the first about 9 months of their life, they literally are not able to regulate their emotions. When they're sad, when they're hungry, when they're tired, when they're scared, when they're cold, their cortisol level rises. And the baby that's the stress hormone in the baby. Babies have no way to lower their own cortisol levels. They physically cannot do it. The only thing that will drop a child's cortisol level is oxytocin. But babies don't release their own oxytocin. Oxytocin is only released through skin-to-skin contact with the mother, through breastfeeding, through cuddling, through rocking, right up here by the neck, right? The oxytocin near the baby's mouth, right? That's the most prominent. That's why mothers just instinctually put the babies up on their chest. So cortisol level in baby goes up. Mom has a very low tolerance for babies crying, much lower than husbands. Fathers let their babies cry a little bit longer. Mothers immediately get up to take care of the child. There's something in us that says, stop that baby from crying. And we grab them, and we put them next to us, we strap them onto us, we wear them all day long, right? They have constant skin-to-skin contact. And so in that way, in the first 6 to 9 months, babies learn to regulate their emotions because your cortisol that you're releasing through skin-to-skin contact helps them to do that. And only then will babies get to the point where they can regulate their own emotions. When babies don't have present mothers. Now, fathers don't do this. They have tried to replicate this in attentive men, and it's only possible using a nasal spray to increase their oxytocin levels. Women do it naturally. And so that baby needs you in those first 3 years to learn what it means to be human, to bond, to trust, to attach, to learn to regulate their own emotions. And when they don't have that, it's very hard for babies to then go out into the world and have a calm and stable identity. So, women, your boss will always be able to replace you, but your children never will be able to. You've got to prioritize motherhood when you're young, if possible, and then when you have your babies, let your world get a little bit smaller for a time. Your career will be there. You can have it all. You just can't have it all at once.
Thank you for this passionate plea. Is there anything you can tell men on how to be better men, or shall they be more manly, or shall they be more understanding of women? What happens when the woman gets argues? What do we do?
Oh, what do we do when a woman argues is a whole separate issue. Advice to men. I will say that in America, there's so much man hatred, it makes me sick, right? So when it comes to my children, I have 2 daughters and I have 2 sons. I am much more concerned about my sons growing up in America than I am about my daughters growing up in America. There's so much girl power, girl empowerment, women are the future, t-shirts everywhere, and men are derided. And so I am much more concerned about the health and confidence of men in America than I am about women. So I feel like the word to men needs to be encouragement. The world needs you. You have something to offer the world and your families that women simply cannot give. You are not replaceable in the world. If you are making a baby, no man will ever be able to give that baby what it is that that baby will want from you. You are irreplaceable, right? Not just in the workplace, but especially in the family, and in the church, right? So I'm going to take off my children's rights hat for a second, because in my book on children's rights, I talk about this from a natural law perspective, right? I don't use scripture in that book. It's all studies and research and stories of children. I'm going to put on my pastor's wife hat for a minute, okay? I'm going to talk to you as a Christian. God ordained for men to be the head of two institutions, the church and the family. He did not say that men had to be in charge of the banks, and men had to be in charge of Supreme Court, or men had to be in charge of the government. He said in the head of the home and the head of the church. That's because those are the two institutions responsible for human formation. Those are the two institutions responsible for making and raising spiritual beings and human beings, right? And it is a requirement that men and women cooperate in making humans, whether it's making spiritual children in the church or making human children in the family. Men are not optional. In fact, I'd say in those two institutions, you actually have a headship and a leadership role that women never will be able to fill. And we see that. We see that the absence of fathers in the United States especially, it does not lead to less toxic men, right? Toxic masculinity tends to come from boys who did not have fathers. It's the presence of fathers, it's the presence of masculinity that makes good men. You are irreplaceable, and we need you.
And now you pitch to women. What can they do to make life better for their children and keep the families together?
Yeah. You don't need to be like men to be successful. I guess that's what I would say. That we have set up so much that if you want to be successful, equal to men, that you have to be the same as men, the same in terms of their career drives, the same in terms of their sexual drives. You don't, right? Men and women are equal, and we're gloriously different. And so you can be a woman in the business world, and you can be a woman in your home. And that does not mean looking just like men, right? There is a feminine beauty, there's a feminine attribute that your children need and that the world needs. Chapter 3 in our book, we talk about the differences between mothering and fathering. So there really is no such thing as parenting. Men and women are so different when it comes to interacting with their children. There's only mothering and fathering. And they are biological differences. Men don't mother, and women don't father. And the way that we couch the differences, the way we frame it in our book, is that women represent the home. They are the original safe space for children, right? We work in more of the confined spaces. Women tend to emphasize fine motor skills like cutting paper, chopping vegetables, right? Tying the shoelaces. Fathers emphasize gross motor skills, running, jumping, climbing, kicking, lighting things on fire, right? Those are the kinds of things that men tend to emphasize. Men represent the world, right? The risk and the wild and the world and the adventure. Dads tend to bring the fun, right? And so women, your children need you to be the safe place. They need you to be the one that's saying, be nice to your brother. They need you to be the one that's cutting the birthday cake exactly right so everyone has the exact same piece, right? And they need the father who's saying, go higher, jump farther, try it again. You're going to make it this time. They need the father who, I'm not home right now, and I guarantee you that they are eating ice cream for dinner, at least once a night, right? Like, mom tends to focus a little more on the everyday caregiving. Dad tends to bring the adventure and the risk and the fun. And kids need both, right? So you don't need to try to be like a man to be a successful woman. You just need to be a confident woman, and your children are going to benefit so greatly when you do.
Katy, welcome to Hungary. I think we would all love to have you here and your family for good.
Yes, I did not bring my husband. He might not have left.
Ja, bring him next time. Maybe it keeps you here too. Now, Katy has asked me to give lots of time for questions. We can try it, yeah? And if we don't have enough questions, we can just keep on.
Is it okay if I talk a little more about what's in the book
sure.
so that people know what they can
go.
ask? Because I love everything we're talking about, but I'll just give you a brief.
Go on.
Because there's going to be questions, I'm sure. So
this is the time, so you know exactly how much is left.
Okay. So we talk about children's rights in Chapter 1, why biology matters in the parent-child relationship in Chapter 2, why gender matters and mothers and fathers are different in Chapter 3. Chapter 4, we talk about marriage and why marriage is a justice issue for children, and you cannot compromise on man-woman marriage. Chapter 5, we talk about divorce and the impact that has on children. Chapter 6, we talk about same-sex parenting and how same-sex parenting is not ideal for children. We spend a lot of time debunking the studies that supposedly show that children fare no different when they're raised by two moms or two dads. Chapter 7, we talk about sperm and egg donation and all of the harm that that inflicts on children, from having identity struggles because they're not growing up with their biological parent, to feeling commodified as if they were bought and sold, to longing to know the identity of their half-siblings. Maybe there's 2 of them, maybe there's 200 of them. Then we talk about surrogacy, how surrogacy is not about babies. Surrogacy is about on-demand designer babies shipped worldwide. And how surrogacy is never child-friendly. There's no way to have a surrogate baby without that baby losing something they have a right to. Chapter 9, we talk about adoption, and we contrast adoption and reproductive technologies. Adoption is an institution centered around the well-being of children. Reproductive technologies are a marketplace centered around the desires of adults. And then Chapter 10, we just talk about our movement and what it is we're trying to accomplish. So all of that is free reign for questions.
And don't forget, the book is back there. All these chapters in one book. You can get it later on. Over there. Okay, question time. And I have actually activated my Slido a few minutes ago, and I spotted a question. So at least one. And I'm terrible with these things, and the question is still there. It hasn't gone away. So I'll just try to read it. Wife's dad grew up in one of the worst housing projects in Pitt, that's Pittsburgh, I suppose. He is white, but often speaks about the policies of President LBJ in ruining black families. Agree, question mark.
Agree, and I'll just quote Thomas Sowell, the famous economist, black economist, who said the black family survived a couple hundred years of slavery and several decades of Jim Crow, but they could not survive the liberal welfare state. And black families, black women, at the turn of the 20th century, black women had higher marriage rates than white women. Even during slavery, blacks were able to keep their families intact when they were not being sold more regularly than white families. So this has nothing to do with the capacity of black people to love and commit and build families. They used to do this better than American family, than your average Caucasian family in the United States. But in the 60s, there was a famous report that came out that sounded the alarm that there was a 25% out-of-wedlock birth rate in the black community, and it was considered a crisis. Something needed to be done. Now, that's at 71%. Right now, overall fatherlessness, out-of-wedlock birth in the United States is around 40%, but in the black community, it's 71%. Very likely due to the help from the government, which actually de-incentivize the involvement of fathers. And so you find those places that are overwhelmingly on government benefits, and what you do find is very few fathers anywhere, even in the neighborhood. So yes, I think that our government has actually, in the name of helping, has actually created much of the fatherless crisis we see today.
Okay, and I have just succeeded in completely losing the Slido interface here, but I know what the next question is. I already saw it. What do you have to say to or about women who are obsessed with their jobs and do not want to have children? I'd like to add a small detail to that, because I've seen the statistics for Germany, and 30% of all women will never have children there.
Well, I think that adults should be able to make the choices that they want to make, right? And I actually think that in a pluralistic society, consenting adults can make whatever choices they want to make for their own life. But when it comes to children, that changes. Once children are in the picture, it is the adults who must conform to what the children's need and what they have a right to, rather than insisting children sacrifice for them. So I think in a pluralistic society, you can permit people to form consensual same-sex relationships. You can permit people to form polyamorous relationships, but you should only promote the one adult relationship that does not require that children lose their mother or father to be in that relationship. So I think that if 30% of women don't want to have children, it's a tragedy for them, because I think that they're missing out on the richest part of life. But I know women who don't want children, and I don't want to make that choice for them. But if you're going to have children, what happens, unfortunately, is a lot of women think, I don't want children, and then they get to be 42 and they suddenly go, I desperately want children. And at that point, sometimes the only way to have children is to purchase gametes from a stranger, to purchase sperm or egg or womb from somebody that will never have a relationship with that child. And so those adult desires to put off childbearing and then suddenly re-engage those desires to have a child very often will cost the children their fundamental rights.
Okay, and I've lost the Slido app, so if there are any more questions, please, Dori. Oh, there's three of them. Let's have someone from the public first.
Thank you so much for this. I have a question. Up until recently, I think I would have agreed with you wholeheartedly that there's a crisis. The biggest crisis is in terms of family or gender is man-hating. But it seems like during COVID, what we've seen is that there's a lot of trouble now for girls, particularly with the trans movement, and even now with the sports men. So it's basically where I'm going with this is, I don't think many of us saw this coming, but women can completely be erased now, seemingly, because now you can become a woman and, be a swimmer, and you know where I'm going with this, right? Yeah. Okay, so what would you say to that? I mean, I know that maybe takes us off the path.
No.
Okay.
Not at all. Totally agree. So I should have had a caveat there, except when it comes to, like, privacy in locker rooms, scholarships on sports teams and things like that, that women are absolutely at risk. So I've got two daughters. My second daughter is sports crazy. Joshua, is she sports crazy? She's sports crazy, right? So she goes to wrestling practice after school 3 hours a day. I pick her up. I take her to soccer. She's been playing on an elite soccer team for 5 years, 2 grades up. She has missed so many sleepovers with friends, so many other activities, so she can be incredible at soccer. I'll tell you what, if a couple boys came and joined that team, she'd be gone, right? She's an incredible female soccer player, but the 16-year-old boys are a totally different class, right? And so yes, there are absolutely threats to women and girls, especially when it comes to the erasure of women. But when it comes to the overall well-being of, my girls don't lack confidence. And obviously, I think a lot of that is because we've poured into them. But when I look around at their friends, yes, a lot of kids are struggling in the United States, but it's very hard for boys to thrive. It's a little easier for girls to find that kind of encouragement and investment. Great question.
All right.
Thank you, Kathy. My question is that in Hungary, we don't have gay marriage yet. And my question is, what can we do as average people to prevent that from coming? Because about the trans movement and everything else related to LGBTQ, we often get criticized that, oh, it's not coming to Hungary. It's not going to happen here. So what can we do?
Katy, maybe we can collect 2 or 3 questions and then you answer. Maybe we have 10 minutes left. So, there was a lady up front here who raised her hand.
Thank you. I have two questions, but I'll limit it to one. What concrete policies could governments institute to really support these ideas of encouraging birth rates, encouraging flourishing and happy families?
What can they do, right? What you incentivize, you get more of, right? So I look at what Hungary is doing, and I'm like, well, that makes sense, right? You've doubled your marriage rate in the last 10 years. And so you're incentivizing it. I've even talked to different women here who have said, oh my gosh, the government made it so much easier to buy a house, right? And no, like the government made it a little more easy for us to have a baby. How incredible, right? What you incentivize, you get more of. And so in the United States, the welfare policy, we incentivized single motherhood, so we got more of it. So I think there's a lot of good that's happening in Hungary around that. What can you do to stave off the coming threat? Because it's coming. It's coming for everyone. And that's why the subtitle of the book is Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement, because the threats are global, and they are coming for all of you. But what you can do, in my opinion, is to be an expert, to know more about this than anyone else, to be able to answer questions when somebody says, well, would you rather have me stay in an unhappy marriage or get divorced and wouldn't the children be happier if I'm happier, right? Or to have responses to, well, what's the harm if we legalize gay marriage? Isn't it just about, isn't love is love? Isn't that all this is about, right? And then you need to be able to say, well, I love my gay family. You should be able to say, I love my gay family. You should be able to demonstrate that you love your gay family and friends. But then you should be able to say, but if we redefine marriage, we will redefine parenthood, and that is an injustice to children. So you need to be able to answer all of the threats that are coming at you. And your government seems to be interested in helping with that. In the United States, my government is not. So it is up to ordinary people to be able to create and mount a defense on behalf of children in comment spaces on social media, but then also responding to bad policies that are being proposed in our legislature as well.
Dori, still have a question?
I'm coming back to you.
Yes, there's a question here as well.
Feel free. Oh, okay. Thank you. I arrived a few minutes late because I promise I was babysitting. I'm not just saying that. So I've heard a lot in the United States in recent years about this phenomenon of co-parenting. And of course, it is more prevalent on the coasts. But even in my time in the Midwest, I've noticed it as well. Could you please comment on that and the effects that it will inevitably have?
Yeah, we've already tried co-parenting. It's called divorce. Right, we've already done that. And so this is not new, this is not progressive, this is regressive in the name of progress. And so we've been trying to do co-parenting. That's actually kind of the positive ways that people who go through amicable divorces talk about their new relationship. Well, we're going to be co-parents. Well, that does not solve the problem of parental access. Children are still getting less than 100% of both of their parents every day. And it does not solve the problem of instability. Both of those co-parents are still going to be pursuing other romantic interests, likely cohabiting with those new romantic interests, some of whom may have children of their own. Sometimes they will get married, and then oftentimes they will divorce. And so what this Van Jones, some celebrity just announced that he's co-parenting, and conscious co-parents, I think is what he called it, right? The kids don't need conscious co-parents, they need married co-parents. They need co-parents who are married to each other, because that is what gives them 100% of mothers' love every day, 100% of fathers' love every day, and the stability that is critical to their development. So yes, this co-parenting is, to me, just a way to continue to base your life on adult desires rather than the fundamental flourishing of children.
Just to be the devil's advocate here, probably most progressives don't say family is bad. They say they're breaking up anyway. What do we do with the many percent of marriages that simply fail and the children that issue from them?
Yeah, we have great compassion because this is a tender subject and it's painful, right? The emotions that the adults are going through is very real and very pressing, and I empathize with it. I mean, like I said, I'm walking with those men and women who are going through those deep struggles. But no amount of adult longing or loss or sadness justifies forcing a child to sacrifice for you. That is literally what adults are supposed to do. We are not supposed to ask the vulnerable to sacrifice for the strong. It's the strong who should sacrifice for the weak. But there are a lot of families that are experiencing pain and fracture and breakdown, and we need to be compassionate. As a friend to them, we need to walk alongside of them because oftentimes they've experienced incredible heartache. But I think our sympathy especially needs to lie with the children. They are always the primary victims. We are all going to have conversations with friends who have an unplanned pregnancy and are trying to figure out, well, should we get married or not? And the answer is, well, you need to do whatever you need to do so this child has everything that they need. And it probably means both of you need to grow up fast, right? Or you're in a situation where your good friend who's a gay man who would be an amazing father, and he would be an amazing father. Maybe he babysits for you. And he says, I desperately want to be a dad. And you say, you would be an incredible dad. But your desire to be a father will never negate that child's right to their mother every day. And so I think that we have to have truth and compassion in hand, but we always have to recognize that children ultimately are the victims if we get the answers wrong, and they're the ones that need defending.
All right, we have 3 more minutes. One last question, very brief.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the Children's Rights Convention. And yes, it's one of the most widely ratified conventions in the world. It is the most. But there are several parts of that are highly controversial, and that's one of the reasons why the United States, I believe, is one of the few countries that hasn't passed. And what this convention does is it takes the question of children's rights too far. And it says that children have a right to any information that they want to have, regardless of what their parents say. And it talks about the children's right to privacy, which extends to, for example, getting an abortion when the parents are against
Please be brief. We have 2 more minutes. We need the answer as well.
I just wanted to mention this and see if you have a reaction.
You are correct. I think that there's a lot of things on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that are not natural child rights. And so we make a distinction about natural rights in our book, and we defend children's natural right to their mother and father because it meets the conditions for a genuine right. And there is a lot in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that I don't think are true natural rights. And if they are natural rights that need to be provided by the parents and not an outside authority, right? So a child has a right to health care, to be cared for, medical housing, all of that. That's true. It is the parents who have the responsibility of providing that for the child. And so I know that there's a lot of progressive governments who have tried to misconstrue that, take it out of context and say, now, since the parents aren't doing this the way we want them to, therefore, we can take control of the situation. And so, yes, I agree that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is problematic in some ways, but the fact that it is so universally accepted, and that is the second right that is listed in there, to me that says, this is not some fringe idea. This is something that is widely accepted throughout the world.
Katy, thank you. This has been a discussion about children's rights, but the thought that I take home from here is that it is about the destiny of our society. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.